yourself?
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On Mark Dolan tonight, in My Big Opinion, Labour divisions on Israel are the tip of the iceberg. In My Take at 10, ITV and the BBC have embarrassed themselves with their coverage of the Israel conflict. This news gathering isn't as easy as it looks. We've also got broadcasting legend Nicholas Owen, my top pundits and tomorrow's papers. Plus, I'll be responding to the massive story of the day, that Boris Johnson has joined GB News. We're live from 9.
Happy Friday, one and all. The weekend starts here, the home of big stories, the home of diverse opinion. It's Mark Dolan tonight, where your feedback is all important. Mark at gbnews.com. It is 9 o'clock on TV, on radio and online. In the United Kingdom and across the world, this is Mark Dolan tonight. The conflict in Israel is escalating this evening. We'll bring you the latest at the top of the hour and throughout the night from our news team. In My Big Opinion, Labour divisions on Israel are the tip of the iceberg. If Starmer gets in, brace yourselves for 5 years of civil war. In the big story, are Hamas winning the PR war? I'll be speaking to a former Islamic extremist and supporter of the terror group who now denounces their actions. You won't want to miss this incredible interview. And in My Take at 10, ITV and the BBC embarrassed themselves with their coverage of the Israel story. This news gathering is not as easy as it looks. Perhaps GB News is the place to go after all. Plus, at 10 o'clock on the button, my first on-air reaction to the news that GB News, the People's Channel, has signed Boris Johnson. My reaction on the hour of 10. So 2 hours of big opinion, big debate and plenty of entertainment along the way. It is Friday night, so why don't you grab something cold and fizzy from the fridge or fire up the kettle and tear open the custard creams. It's going to be a great show. Producer Greg is back. I've got a good feeling in my bones. Lots to get through. First, the news and Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB newsroom. The breaking news is out of Israel tonight. The Israeli military's begun a huge bombardment of northern Gaza. As senior commanders confirmed, they will expand their ground offensive in the hours to come. Our security editor Mark White is live in Tel Aviv with the latest. Mark.
Well, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's spokesman Mark Regev has just said that Hamas will feel Israel's wrath tonight, that tonight Israel begins payback. Well, as he is speaking, Israel is pounding positions of Hamas in northern Gaza using artillery and tank fire, missiles and fast jets to pound those positions across the northern sector of Gaza. Israel are warning those citizens in that area to get out, to move south as quickly as possible. We're told that all communications with Gaza have now been cut off. Landlines and mobile phones and internet coverage has all been severed. Also, the UK Foreign Office now warning its nationals in the West Bank and here in Israel that there is the possibility of increased rocket fire as a result of what is happening in terms of this escalation, an escalation that Israel confirmed would involve a rather significant escalation of the ground war in the hours ahead.
Mark, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Well, tonight's developments follow consecutive nights of Israeli incursions into Gaza using tanks and infantry and almost 3 weeks of aerial bombardment. Shellings and explosions have been seen on the border with Gaza, where Israeli forces have been massing since the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October. In addition, the Israeli Defence Forces say their Air Force are carrying out extensive strikes on the network of tunnels and other infrastructure in the enclave. The UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, has again called for a ceasefire and the release of all hostages. He says this is a moment of truth and history will judge us all. Meanwhile, some breaking news from New York. The United Nations has overwhelmingly adopted a resolution calling for a humanitarian truce in Gaza. The resolution, drafted by Arab states, condemns all violence, terror and indiscriminate acts against Palestinian and Israeli civilians. Members of the General Assembly are also demanding aid access to the besieged Gaza Strip. The resolution passed with 120 votes in favour, with 45 abstentions, and 14, including Israel and the United States, who voted no. The resolution is non-binding, but it could put diplomatic pressure on Israel to de-escalate the conflict. In the UK, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer are under growing pressure to change their position on the war. Well, that is it for the moment. We'll keep you up to date with all the developing news coming from Gaza and Israel as we go through the evening. Now it's back to Mark.
Thanks, Aaron. Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. All the latest on Israeli troops going into Gaza as and when we get it. In my big opinion, Labour divisions on Israel are the tip of the iceberg. If Starmer gets in, brace yourselves for 5 years of civil war. In the big story, are Hamas winning the PR war? I'll be speaking to a former Islamic extremist and supporter of the terror group who now denounces their actions. You won't want to miss this incredible interview. My Mark Meets guest is one of the most respected journalists in the world, US TV news icon Diane Diamond, who was the first journalist to reveal child abuse allegations against Michael Jackson and has now turned her attention to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. She joins us before the end of the hour. In My Take at 10, ITV and the BBC have embarrassed themselves with their coverage of the Israel conflict. This news gathering is not as easy as it looks. Perhaps GB News is the place to go after all. Speaking of which, Boris Johnson joins the channel. I'll get reaction from TV's news legend Nicholas Owen. And I'll be reacting to the news that Boris is joining us in a special statement at 10 p.m. You won't want to miss it. In a Mark Dolan Tonight exclusive, GB News investigative reporter Charlie Peters reveals the shocking scale of extremist speeches in British mosques since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. We've got tomorrow's front pages at 10:30 with three top pundits who haven't been told what to say and who don't follow the script tonight. Paul Richards, David Oldroyd-Bolt and Jasmine Birtles. Plus, the most important part of the show, your emails. They come straight to my laptop, gbnews.com. This show has a strict golden rule. We don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. A big 2 hours to come. My reaction to Boris at 10. But first, my big opinion. A Labour government is coming. Be careful what you wish for. The cervix-free leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, isn't even in number 10 yet, but his party are in the throes of an all-out civil war. There are rumours of possible resignations from the shadow cabinet, and over 250 Labour councillors have signed a letter challenging Starmer's position on Israel, which he says has a right to defend itself. Although there seems to be a difference between what he told LBC's Nick Ferrari and what he told ITV News hours later.
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
OK, right, so Israel has a right to defend itself, or does it? Here's what Starmer told ITV News shortly after.
I was saying Israel had the right to self-defence, and when I said that right, it was that right to self-defence. I was not saying that Israel had the right to cut off water, food, fuel or medicines.
So according to Starmer, viewers and listeners misheard what he meant. Did we? Or maybe we're just stupid. Let's play it again.
Siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right.
I'll let you decide. Guardian columnist Owen Jones furiously labelled Starmer a liar. I shouldn't seek to use such unparliamentary language myself, but it tells you that far from being strong and stable, steady and secure, Starmer is a political accident waiting to happen. Don't take my word for it. Labour backbenchers berated our would-be Prime Minister's position for what they called Israeli war crimes. And to make matters worse, the Labour mayor for London, who seems unbothered by spiralling levels of crime in the capital, choosing to focus his attention on the Middle East. Take a listen.
I joined the international community in calling for a ceasefire. It would stop the killing and would allow vital aid supplies to reach those who need it in Gaza.
Calling for an end to violence is a bit rich from Mayor Khan. I suspect many Londoners would like a ceasefire from the relentless knife crime in his city. And this talk of ceasefire is effectively asking Israel to be a sitting duck to terror. A ceasefire is snake oil language. It's doublespeak for Israel, suck it up. If you thought October the 7th was bad, you don't think Hamas are planning worse? They have only one objective: genocide. And in the face of this rebadged Nazism, you'll continue to see Starmer and his party tie themselves in knots over this important issue. This is off the back of the Labour-supporting unions furious with Starmer's push for net zero, which they believe will harm industry. Labour are split on woke issues too. Having seen what happened to Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, Starmer wants to limit people's ability to self-ID their gender. That means deciding from one day to the next that you're now a woman rather than a bloke. A sensitive and sensible move from Starmer, but causing unrest among progressive backbenchers who think there are 100 genders. And then there's trouble brewing over Labour's spending pledges. The left of the party want him to splash the cash, but he says there's no money, promising to use the Office for Budget Responsibility as a fig leaf for his prudent investment plans. Starmer's strategy is to say as little as possible and to be more silent than Charlie Chaplin. But Starmer's leadership is starting to look like a silent comedy itself, with more pratfalls than the famous film Tramp could ever dream of. Whenever he does open his mouth and makes a plan, such as calling for closer alignment with Europe, scrapping oil and gas licences or cancelling the Rwanda plan even if it works, Starmer gets himself into immediate hot water. And now, after having more positions on Israel than the Kama Sutra, Starmer once again gets found out when tested. There's a war in the Middle East, but an existential conflict is playing out on those opposition benches too. It's my fear that with a slim majority, Labour as the governing party will frankly be ungovernable. Recent bickering among Tories will look like the Queen's Garden Party by comparison. Starmer's not even in yet, but he already looks like a cucumber sandwich. This guy always gets himself in a pickle. And your reaction, Mark, at gbnews.com. Let me know your thoughts. I get to your emails very presently. But tonight's top pundits, former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards, broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt, and journalist, author and presenter Jasmine Birtles. Jasmine, I think that the split over Israel is the tip of the iceberg for Labour. What's your view?
Well, it could be, but, you know, if you're honest, we could say the same, frankly, for the Tory party. We've got factions everywhere, but certainly I think it is particularly obvious with Labour because they're trying to pull back from the what seemed to be overt anti-Semitism of the Corbyn era. And I know from Jewish friends of mine that they absolutely would not vote Labour. So I think this is what Starmer is trying to do. He's trying to be as conciliatory as possible to the Labour voters, the Jewish voters, while at the same time keeping the Muslim followers happy as well, which is frankly almost impossible, I would say.
Yeah, Paul, Labour split on net zero, split on woke trans issues, split on the economy and split on Israel.
Well, I think you're reporting that a major political party has got different views within it. But is that news, really?
I think it is, because this party wants to be in power.
If you look at the conference that Labour had in Liverpool, it was united. There was the silence for the dead of the massacre, the Hamas massacre. Starmer won all of the votes on the conference floor, despite the unions that you've mentioned and all the others. He is in charge of the Labour Party. And, of course, there are going to be noises off and people who are unhappy about that and people who would love Corbyn to come back. But it ain't happening, so he's in charge.
Yeah, well, you confidently say that, but the bottom line is you've got backbenchers already diluting his position on Israel, talking about war crimes. That is a direct contradiction of the policy that he's got on the issue.
Well, every party has those kinds of splits and rows, doesn't it? But, I mean, the point is they are noises off, they are a minority, they are seeking to make mischief, let's be honest. These are people unreconciled to his leadership in the first place. They would love to have Corbyn back, but it ain't happening for them. And this is the context for this. They're just making trouble.
OK, what do you think about this, David? Do you think this demonstrates that Labour are in trouble before they've even gone into power?
I think it demonstrates that there is a significant problem within the Labour Party of, as you said, people unreconciled to the change of leadership from Mr Corbyn to Sir Keir. And the question I have is, what about the party activists? What about the people seeking to become Labour MPs at the next election? Do they represent Sir Keir and his, to me, more reasonable views? Well, how do we know this? There is no test of this other than their being in Parliament and putting their views before the public. And I worry that actually the parliamentary party and its splits will be mirrored or, in fact, amplified in the Labour Party constituencies around the country, and that Labour MPs to come at the next election will be of the more Corbynite rather than Starmerite stance when it comes to this issue particularly.
I can tell you we've made a lot of effort to make sure that isn't going to happen.
I'm sure you have, but
our selections have been decent people that are selected for those margins.
And you don't think, for example, that net zero is going to be a sort of point of conflict when Starmer gets into number 10? After all, the unions have said that his rush to net zero will destroy jobs and hurt industry.
You know how politics works. You know, there is always going to be this ongoing debate, especially around huge issues like climate change, geopolitics and so on, gender and all the things you've mentioned. It's just about who's the dominant voice, who's in charge, who gets their view through. And at the moment, that is Starmer. He has shown incredible leadership for 2 years now. He's turned around a position of worst ever defeat to the brink of government. And he's a strong leader. That's what you need.
I just wonder briefly, though, Jasmine, whether with a slim majority Labour will find the movement ungovernable, because if it's a 10 or 20 seat majority, that will hand power to the Corbynites on the backbenches, at which point I think Starmer's in trouble.
Well, that's a very good point. And, you know, certainly if you speak to those who were pro-Corbyn and still are, they absolutely hate the current incumbent. They hate the way it's going. So, yes, if there is a slim majority, and I suspect there will be, then it's going to be interesting. It's going to be sparks.
Well, look, folks, what do you think about this? Love my pundits tonight, but let me know your thoughts. Mark at gbnews.com. Coming up next in the big story, are Hamas winning the PR war? I'll be speaking to a former Islamic extremist and supporter of the terror group who now denounces their actions. It's going to be an incredible interview. He's live in the studio. Why did he join Hamas? That's next.
Who's
We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'll get to your emails shortly, but it's time now for the big story. And as pressure grows on Israel to call a ceasefire, or at least pause its response to the October the 7th attacks in order to allow aid to get into Gaza, and with criticism of Israel's response from many politicians and public figures in this country and around the world, are Hamas winning the PR battle? Has this medieval terror group managed against the odds to achieve the moral high ground? And how dangerous might that be for both sides in the conflict? Let's speak to Sohail Ahmed, who is a student at the University of Cambridge and a former Hamas supporter who has been de-radicalised and now condemns the organisation. In a recent tweet, he said the following: "In my experience, most Muslims haven't grasped how bad Hamas actually are. I say that as someone who used to support Hamas. To anyone seeing this tweet who doesn't know me, I used to be an Islamist extremist. I genuinely believed all the bad stuff about Hamas, and it was lies from Israel." Well, let's get the views now of the man himself. Great to have you in the studio, Sohail. Thank you for joining us. How did you get sucked into being a Hamas supporter?
See, it started at a very young age. I was radicalised from the age 6 onwards, which some people might find surprising. You don't think of people being radicalised at such a young age, but I was. And I was raised with this hate-filled ideology whereby I believed Britain was the enemy. I believed that non-Muslims are in a perpetual war against Muslims. It's just the standard extremist Islamist kind of ideology that I was just raised in.
Was it family members or friends or people you didn't know that were grooming you in this way?
It was my parents, in fact. Right. They had themselves become extreme.
What did this group get you to do? I mean, did you actively participate in any way? Did you attend meetings? What was your sort of role within this grouping?
Absolutely, I wasn't involved in any sort of group per se. I was always kind of on my own. So I never officially joined a group as such, but I believed entirely in the ideology.
And were you online reading materials?
Absolutely.
And also were you communicating with others online about your beliefs?
Yes, unfortunately, and I'm very ashamed to say so. I did have a role to play in spreading this ideology. And that's something that I will take with me to the grave.
How would that manifest itself in terms of you having spread the ideology? What did you do?
So in college, for instance, I was very well known in the Islamic society. And I convinced a lot of people to become extremists like me. I didn't kind of say anything about terrorism. There was no support for violence in terms of my convincing others. But it was the rest of the extremist ideology. That was what I was pushing.
The idea that the West is the enemy.
Exactly.
And that you're either a believer or an infidel.
Yes.
What are the goals of Hamas, given the fact that you were embedded in its ideology, if not proactively within the group, but just the ideas of Hamas? What is their goal?
Their goal is to eliminate Israel, wipe it off the map. They do not want any sort of negotiation. They do not want a two-state solution. They don't want a solution at all. The only solution they are for is wiping Israel off the map, and that will involve genocide.
How much support do Hamas have among Palestinians? Is that question even possible to answer?
It's very difficult to answer because obviously you can't kind of study and do polling data in the Gaza Strip with Hamas in charge. But from what I've seen and from what I've gleaned, especially from friends that live in the Gaza Strip, it is very widespread.
And what was the trigger that inspired you to walk away from this ideology?
It was a number of things, but chief among them, it was my understanding evolutionary biology. Might sound strange.
So science saved you?
Science did indeed save me. But I realized that contradicted my entire ideology. And I was forced then to change. My entire world just unraveled.
Because you learnt about the origins of humanity via nature, and this contradicted the theology preached by the likes of Hamas.
It wasn't just that, but there were other incidents too. For instance, once I went to a Jewish home. I was selling a computer to them. And the little toddler, they had a little kid, came up to me and suddenly just became attached to me. And the parent said, he wants to play with you. So I was really young. I sat down and started playing with his toy cars. And his parents were looking on what was happening and smiling. And I remember looking across at them and thinking, I hate them, but they don't hate me. In fact, they're trusting me with their child. And that changed a lot for me.
Are Israel right that Hamas need to be eliminated, or is there another way?
Honestly, as long as Hamas is in power, there will be no peace. There just categorically will not be. I mean, with all the firing of rockets and causing Israel to respond and retaliate, it's just a perpetual cycle of violence. And it makes there is no strategic sense to what Hamas is doing because it's hurting the Palestinian people. It's hurting
and killing them, of course.
Exactly.
Of course, critics of Israel would argue that Israel has a case to answer for its treatment of the Palestinian people. What would you say to that?
I would say that before other people got involved internationally, I would kind of caution against that because often this conflict is viewed in black and white terms, and a lot of people kind of lose their minds over it. They have a caricature idea of it, of good guy versus bad guy.
And it's very tribal.
Exactly, it's very tribalistic. And the conflict is very complicated. It's got multiple facets to it.
What have you been through personally on this journey? How much of an impact has it had on you as a young person being sort of sucked into this ideology and then leaving it? Tell me about that journey for you.
Oh, that journey. Honestly, rejecting my former ideological beliefs, my extremist beliefs, was the hardest thing I've ever done. And honestly, I don't think I will ever do anything as difficult as that in my entire life. Because I had to risk the possibility that I might make the wrong choice and then burn in hell forever. I had that genuine fear.
Like leaving a cult?
Exactly. It was very much like a cult.
And have you suffered pushback from relatives or friends as a result of this move away from this ideology?
That's a good question. In fact, everyone pretty much abandoned me when I kind of came out of the ideology, when I, you know, showed my true ideas. Everyone just left me.
So you did it alone?
I did it alone.
And are you in touch with your family now, your parents even?
No, not really. The relationship is non-existent.
And would you say that they are still in that rabbit hole of the ideology of hate and of Hamas's beliefs?
From what I'm hearing, yes.
Do you hope at some point you could reconnect with your family? Is there any hope of that?
Honestly, given that given the fact that I'm so diametrically opposed to their views, I wouldn't want to get back in touch with them.
Have you feared for your safety as a result of this move, and especially being brave enough to come on channels like this and tell your story?
Yes, it's always a concern, but I've thought about it, and I came to the conclusion that regardless of what happens to me, I have to do something. I have to serve my country. Previously, I wanted the downfall of Britain. Now I'm a proud British patriot. And I want this issue to be resolved. It's far too dangerous, far too severe, and far too embedded.
Israeli troops are now crossing into Gaza. We're expecting casualties, we're expecting bombings, we're expecting armed combat. Do you support the actions of Israel right now? Because there are many politicians in this country and elsewhere calling for a ceasefire.
See, on an emotional level, I do want the fighting to stop, because seeing the human suffering affects me.
And you want supplies to get through like we all do.
Exactly. But on a rational level, Israel has no choice but to respond to this attack. If they don't respond, Hamas will keep pushing and will do something worse next time. In fact, this is we've got a lot of evil options, and essentially we have to choose the lesser of the two evils. And the lesser of the two evils is you respond to Hamas, there will be civilian casualties, but in the long run, you save more lives.
You're a remarkable guy. Congratulations on your journey, because you've clearly chosen a more positive outlook now and less about hate and destroying another group of people because of their race. It's amazing courage, and thank you for telling your story. You're a bit of a genius as well, aren't you? First of all, Open University, was it a maths degree?
Maths and physics.
Maths and the easy subjects, maths and physics.
Very easy subjects.
And then you got into Cambridge University, and you're now doing immunology, is that right?
That's correct. I'm doing 2 part-time degrees at both institutions.
Oh, you're a busy guy. Well, look, and I wish you really good luck with your degree. And next time, why don't you come on? Let's talk about COVID, shall we? Just for old time's sake.
Absolutely.
You've chosen a very sort of topical degree to be doing, haven't you?
Indeed.
For the next pandemic, maybe. Listen, great to have you in the studio. Thank you for telling your story. Sohail Ahmed, I think you'll agree, a remarkable guy. Your reaction, mark at gbnews.com. Can the hateful ideology of Hamas ever be destroyed? Coming up with tonight's pundits, Boris Johnson joins GB News. I'll get reaction from his colleague in Parliament and here at the channel. Plus, GB News investigative reporter Charlie Peters reveals the shocking scale of extremist speeches in British mosques since the start of the Israel-Hamas war. That's next.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What a day. More on the bombshell news that Boris Johnson is to join GB News as a presenter. I'll be giving my first on-air reaction to that news at exactly 10 o'clock. But it is a massive signing for the channel.
Hi folks, Boris Johnson here. I'm excited to say that I'm shortly going to be joining you on GB News, and I'm going to be giving this remarkable new TV channel my unvarnished views on everything from Russia, China, the war in Ukraine, how we meet all those challenges, to the huge opportunities that lie ahead for us, why I think our best days are yet to come, and why, on the whole, the people of the world want to see more global Britain, not less. So join me on GB News for some great British television.
Well, I'm very excited about the news. I'm delighted that Boris is joining us, although devastated that I will no longer be the presenter with the messiest hair. Listen, let's get reaction from somebody that's already a massive star on the network, one half of Esther and Phil on Saturday mornings at 10, Philip Davies. Philip, what a signing!
Oh, it's amazing. It really is amazing. And, you know, lots of our viewers, you see all the views that come in from our viewers, Mark, and as I do. And lots of our viewers, they love Boris Johnson. And they'll be absolutely over the moon that he'll be joining the channel. And it's a real feather in the cap for the channel. Boris is the most influential and most recognisable politician of his generation. And the fact that he's decided to come to GB News is fantastic for the channel and says a lot about how credible people like former prime ministers think GB News is after such a short time on air.
Most definitely, Philip. It's clear why we wanted him, perhaps arguably the most influential, consequential elected politician of his generation. He got Brexit done. He kept Jeremy Corbyn out at number 10 with that 2019 landslide victory. Many networks would have liked his autograph, his signature. Talk TV, Channel 4, ITV, Sky, you name it. Why do you think he chose GB News?
I think there's lots of reasons. I think he knows that lots of his biggest fans are GB News viewers, and in some cases GB News presenters. But also, I think the other point is GB News is an exciting, growing channel. It believes in free speech. It does it. I mean, you can't imagine Boris at the BBC, can you, with all their
layers and layers of rules and policies and things like that. You know, Boris is a free spirit, and the free spirit needs the channel that believes in free speech.
Look, I'm delighted that he's coming, but let me tell you, Philip, you'll always be my favourite, and you're back tomorrow at 10 with the missus.
I certainly am, and unfortunately for me, Mark, you'll always be her favourite.
Listen, I'll believe that all day long, if only. But listen, can't wait for tomorrow's show. Philip, thank you for joining us live from Westminster, burning the midnight oil there, the brilliant Philip Davies MP, who returns at 10 tomorrow. That show on a Saturday morning, I love it because I'm tidying the house. I've got it on GB News Radio, on DAB, and it's a cracking listen, and of course, even better to watch. Reacting to this big signing, let's get the views of former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards, broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt, and journalist, author and presenter Jasmine Birtles. And listen, Paul, there's no way that you are the ideological soulmate of Boris Johnson, but plenty of people, including those on the left, will be giving him a bit of a watch, won't they?
I was talking to a former New Labour minister this afternoon about this very topic, and we agreed on two things. One, anyone who underestimates Boris is an idiot, and the 2019 election showed us that in spades. And second of all, what on earth were the Conservatives thinking of getting rid of him? He was obviously an electoral asset. It just shows the state of the Tory party that he's ended up here rather than still running the country.
David, your reaction to this news. My eyes popped out of my head when I saw it on Twitter.
Yeah, amazing's the word, isn't it, really? I think it's good that Boris Johnson is going back to his natural milieu, which is entertainment rather than politics, which is a serious craft for an unserious man. The point is that he was always a rather disastrous politician. The amazing thing was that he ever managed to get anything done at all, and I give much of the credit to that, not to him, but to those around him who managed to keep the extraordinary show on the road for just long enough for him to win that election. I think it will be great viewing. I think you've done the most wonderful commercial thing you could possibly have done as a channel, and I applaud whoever's decision it was for doing that, and I hope it brings in many, many viewers who get many hours of entertainment from him while serious people try and run the country and fix the mess that it's been in for the past 25 years.
Well, Jasmine, I don't know what the package is, what the deal is, but he'll certainly be able to pay for some of that expensive wallpaper of which he's so fond.
Yes, he will. Yes, it would be lovely to know how much, but I doubt if we'll ever find out. It will, as David said, it will be hugely entertaining to watch him, listen to him. I will certainly be watching at least a few of his programmes. What I'd like to know is, though, that if he's going to be held accountable in these programmes for some of the things that he did while he was actually in power. You know, lockdown, that was under his watch. And all the problems with that, the money printing, the vaccine issues. I'd like to know if he's going to be held accountable for that. I suspect possibly not. But
not to mention masking us and masking kids in the classroom, Jasmine.
Yeah,
well, listen, I'll be giving my considered verdict on Boris Johnson joining GB News at exactly 10 o'clock, not after, just on the button of 10. I don't think you'll want to miss it. My brilliant pundits are back shortly, but almost 3 weeks on from the terror attack on Israel, which saw the loss of 1,400 lives and over 200 hostages taken, the full scale of anti-Semitic sentiment within British mosques is coming to light. GB News' investigative reporter Charlie Peters, who reported on the events in the Middle East live from Israel over the last couple of weeks, joins us in the studio with a brand new expose. Charlie, thank you for joining us. What have you discovered?
Well, the conflict is hotting up tonight. There's looking like there's going to be further ground incursions into the Gaza Strip. But what was fascinating while we were there, seeing all the extreme violence taking place, the horrors and the daily rocket attacks that we endured even in central Israel, was how many British, Israelis and Britons we met out there were looking back at events in London and across the UK and thinking, do you know what, I'd rather be here. Because in Israel, I have an Iron Dome missile defence system to keep me safe. But they saw people protesting in a very violent manner in the UK, saw some of the comments and chants being made and the reports of rocketing and anti-Semitic incidents, and they're very concerned. Well, since I got back on Sunday night, I've spent quite a lot of time looking into the problems at home, because this is a war that's going on in Britain too. I've been watching plenty of footage released, often very quietly, by many mosques across the country. This isn't just in London, throughout Britain. And here's some of what I've had to recover. Let's have a watch now.
When the criminal Jews, they escalate the aggression against our Muslim brothers and sisters in Palestine.
Intervene, intervene. Stop the ethnic cleansing of Ahlu Gaza and Palestine. Intervene. Speech, don't want to hear it. Don't want to hear no speech. Intervene and stop the genocide of Palestinian Muslims.
It's like a rapist saying that he's the victim. It's like someone coming into your house, telling you can live in the cellar, locking you up in the cellar, and you decided one day I'm going to fight back. And you scratched him on his face.
The Jews will fight you and you will prevail over them. Then a rock will say, "Oh Muslim, here is a Jew behind me, kill him."
Well, that's damning footage. It's important that we understand the scale of anti-Semitic hate in this country on British soil.
Yeah, it is rocketing up. Hundreds of incidents reporting. The Met today announcing a significant rise. They did an operational brief on the work they're doing. They're looking for more information from the public. But also there's work for journalists to do here, to look into these speeches and actually to have the bravery to report on the violence that's happening in England as well as in Israel. I mean, so let's just go through the comments we just heard. Okay, first and foremost, describing the criminal Jews. That was a mosque in Swansea, in South Wales, calling on Muslim armies to invade Israel, calling for a direct escalation from Arab armies in the region. That's extreme statements, especially in a religious sermon. And then, further comments there, quoting from scripture, kill a Jew, something like that. It's such an extreme thing to say, even in the context that he was giving it from scripture. Really damning and I would say quite evil commentary to report on and to watch. And I can understand why so many British Israelis that we met in Israel, the GB News team, said, what's it like at home? That's what they wanted to know. What's going on in London? Because we're here because we've moved here or we're here to serve in the army. And we're very, very nervous about what they're seeing back home. And when you see that kind of footage, you can understand why.
Well, indeed. I mean, these figures, these are not just sort of lonely nutters tweeting from their mother's bedroom. These are influential faith leaders in this country, people with status, people with authority, and, of course, people with a platform. Have they had anything to say?
So I've sent off dozens of emails over the last few days looking for responses from many of these mosques. And I should just say that's just a snippet of the information that we've got. And further reporting will come on this in the next few days, online and on the channel. Most of the mosques have said that they are going to investigate. Some of them have said that those speakers were not full-time employees, but also plenty have responded by standing by their comments, especially saying, we won't condemn the Hamas terrorists unless you also condemn Israel. So quite a strong and strident stance defending what they're seeing. I think it has erupted extreme differences and extreme opposition in our own country. And it's, I think it's quite concerning to see these things take place at home as well as in Israel.
Charlie, can I salute you for your coverage of the conflict in Israel? Very, very hard time and very, very difficult conditions in which to report, but you did so with such distinction, as has Mark White, and also this important expose, of which I think there's more to come this weekend. Is that right?
That's right, more to come. I mean, we'll be releasing more footage and more responses and over 3,000 words of quotes to come on this story, and which is, I think, well, the police have been contacted, the Charity Commission have been contacted. Just one final thing to say, some of these mosques are registered charities. Some of them have received hundreds of thousands of pounds in government grants. The Charity Commission is taking a look. I've sent on all the information to the Metropolitan Police, who of course have counter-terrorism duties for across the entire country. We'll see what they say.
More groundbreaking journalism courtesy of Charlie Peters, GB News correspondent. Coming up next in my take at 10 in just a few minutes' time, ITV and the BBC embarrassed themselves with their coverage of the Israel conflict. This news gathering's not as easy as it looks. They don't have Charlie Peters, do they? Perhaps GB News is the place to go after all. I'll be dealing with the mainstream broadcasters shortly. But first, my Mark Meets guest is one of the most respected journalists in the world, US TV news icon Diane Diamond. She's next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Oh!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. A lot of excitement about the return of Boris Johnson to public life via GB News. That's right. I'll be talking about it at exactly 10 o'clock. This from Matron and Bingo Bob. I'd love to be round at your place. That sounds like fun. They said, "Hi, Mark. Well done getting Boris. He's a great guy and needs to be back in number 10. He was a great Prime Minister. And the best we've had since Maggie Thatcher. Bring Boris back." A couple of you critical of Boris Johnson, saying they're disappointed the channel has employed him. Well, I'll be giving my verdict on Boris Johnson, warts and all, in exactly 10 minutes' time. David, on the issue of the Middle East, he says 50,000 Jews in the UK fought for the British during World War I. This land is their land too. It's abhorrent that ignorant young people are on the streets chanting vile anti-Semitic rhetoric. David, you're absolutely right. Keep those emails coming. Mark at gbnews.com. It's time now for the results of the latest Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll. I've been asking, will you be watching Boris Johnson on GB News? And I've got 2 answers. You can either have yes or definitely yes. So 73% say yes. And 26.9% say definitely. So there you go. Take that as a yes. Looking forward to this. It's time for Mark Meets. And tonight, one of the most respected journalists in the world, US TV news legend Diane Diamond, the woman perhaps best known for breaking the story of child molestation allegations against Michael Jackson and her coverage of the subsequent criminal trial. She spent much of her career exposing corruption and abuse among the rich and powerful. Plus, she's interviewed notorious Hollywood madam Heidi Fleiss, Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassin James Earl Ray, and she won plaudits for her fearless coverage of the O.J. Simpson murder trial. She's also investigated the case of missing British schoolgirl Madeleine McCann. But it's her work exposing Michael Jackson that may prove to have the most significant legacy, placing a permanent question mark over the reputation of arguably the biggest male star in the world since Elvis Presley. And her new book is out. Looks like a fascinating read. It's called We're Here to Help When Guardianship Goes Wrong. You'll remember what happened to Britney Spears. We'll discuss that in just a moment. Diane Diamond, welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. Where does this appetite for exposing the truth and unearthing corruption come from?
Oh, I don't know, somewhere deep within my soul, I suppose. I guess it was instilled by my parents, who always preached integrity. Your word was your bond, and you treated each other like you wanted to be treated. And when I find there's some inequity or some bully on a lesser victim, I'm there. I want to tell that story.
And you did that for Michael Jackson's alleged victims. At what point, Diane, did you realise that Michael Jackson, at the time the biggest star in the world, had a serious case to answer?
I suppose August 1993. That sounds so long ago, doesn't it? I
20
had
years.
Boris call me
30.
in my newsroom and said, I have a police report for you. I have a report from the Child Welfare Department. I want to give it to you. It's confidential. You can never use my name. And I met this source in an Italian restaurant in Santa Monica, California, and I got the police file on what the investigation on Michael Jackson was. So, I mean, I'm a reporter. I'm an investigative reporter, and I couldn't keep that to myself. I had to tell people what the police were looking at.
How compelling was the evidence, Diane?
Pretty damn compelling. May I say that on television?
You may.
Yeah. I mean, the reports were so specific. Names, addresses, times, dates, places that things occurred, the young boy's words written down on the police report. And so we just generally did a shorter piece, short type of piece about what these reports were revealing. And then the floodgates opened. And I got calls constantly from people who had worked with Michael Jackson, who were still working with Michael Jackson. And, you know, you work your sources and you try to confirm what they're saying, or you don't put them on the air.
Now, of course, it's important to stress that Michael Jackson, when alive, denied these allegations. But based upon the allegations that you looked at very carefully, Diane, what was his modus operandi? What was his alleged way of going about these crimes which were never proven?
Well, and we must say, too, that he went to a criminal trial and was acquitted on all charges. So that's important, and that's in my book that I wrote about that. His M.O., as far as I could ascertain, was to pinpoint young males. Now, there sometimes were some young girls around him, too, but mostly young males, and then invite them to Neverland. Now, can you imagine a 10, 12-year-old, 8-year-old boy going to a place where there's a zoo and a fully stocked theater with any candy you want to eat and a swimming pool and slides and motorbikes and a train, and it's all yours, all yours. And then you get invited to sleep in the master bedroom.
Do you think Michael Jackson was a paedophile?
Well, you know, I don't reach any conclusion in the book I wrote. I let readers go through the evidence as I learned it step by step. But over the years, yes, I have come to the conclusion that he was a very public pedophile who very nearly looked at all of us and said, try to stop me. I'm Michael Jackson. Now, you know, just you making me talk about this now, Mark, my email's going to blow up and I'll get more death threats. But yes, I do believe that he was guilty of the crimes.
You reported on the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, a British child who disappeared from her parents' accommodation at a holiday resort in Portugal. What's your view of what may have happened, and will we ever find this poor young woman?
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think so. Just given the proximity to where she was taken, I think probably there's another case here, a young girl who disappeared in Aruba, and we just recently discovered her body was put into the ocean and will never be recovered. And I'm afraid that is probably what happened to Madeleine McCann. There is a suspect, a German man, who I really like for this crime. He was in the vicinity. He had a history. And if her fate was death, I hope it was quick.
Listen, I'm going to have to read your Michael Jackson book, which is called Be Careful Who You Love, Inside the Michael Jackson Case. But you do have a brand new book out, which I'm going to have to read as well. It's called We're Here to Help When Guardianship Goes Wrong. Apologies in advance, Diane, the clock's against us, but can you give us a brief summary of this book and why you wrote it?
Sure. It again struck me that there were people being victimized by bullies. And the bullies in this case are in the justice system here in America. Guardianship, just briefly, is a program that you have a similar one there. I believe it's called deputyship.
Yeah.
When there's a vulnerable person, older, maybe an Alzheimer victim, someone living with disabilities, and they need help living their life, they get a guardian from a court. Now, it used to be a family member was named as a guardian, but more and more I've discovered, and I've been investigating this topic for 8 years now, judges are appointing for-profit strangers to come.
And it looks like an absolute shambles. Diane, the book is called We're Here to Help When Guardianship Goes Wrong. We'll speak again. Thank you for your time. Next up, my reaction to Boris Johnson joining GB News.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 10 o'clock. On television, on radio and online. In the United Kingdom and across the world, this is Mark Dolan Tonight. And a historic day for the channel. Greg, before we start, can you cut the music, please? Thank you very much. How long have the establishment been predicting or even planning the demise of GB News? Well, let's be honest, they've had it in for us since before we came on air, which tells you everything you need to know about their motives. Nothing to do with the output, just abject terror at the thought of a new player on the media scene, especially one with an alternative viewpoint that dares to challenge the prescribed narrative on net zero, woke political correctness, our history, the economy, race relations, or the policing of our borders. And God forbid we should give you a voice. Of course, everyone wants to cancel us, from the likes of ex-Sky News star Adam Bolton to a cabal of illiberal campaigners who want to stop funding debate by orchestrating an advertising boycott of the channel, a campaign which, in the long run, let me tell you, is doomed to fail. Unlike this place, which goes from strength to strength. Our website alone is already one of the biggest in the country. We regularly cruise past our rivals in prime. I'm often beating Sky at about this time. And Mark Dolan Tonight is officially the most listened to current affairs programme in this time slot in commercial radio broadcasting. There are the viral videos, the newspaper column inches, the debates about our very existence on Newsnight and the Today programme, and the bitchy, condescending remarks of its presenters. People just can't stop talking about us. And that went up a gear today with the signing of Boris Johnson, the most consequential elected politician of his generation, becoming a presenter on this very channel. Mark Dolan Tonight is the home of diverse opinion. And it's my strong opinion that whilst Boris deserves credit for winning in 2019 and thus keeping Jeremy Corbyn out of number 10, and he deserves credit for getting Brexit across the line, he was also the architect of lockdowns and mask and vaccine tyranny, for which I will never forgive him. But it's all about opinions, and whether you agree with Boris or disagree, there's no question we'll all be watching and we'll all be listening. The biggest name in politics has joined the most talked about channel in the country. Boris Johnson got Brexit done and GB News got Boris done. The appointment of one of the most famous politicians in the world to come to this place shows how far we've come in 2 and a bit years. And we've got so much further to go. I do hope you'll join me on Mark Dolan Tonight and on GB News for what promises to be the journey of a lifetime. We've only just started. But let me tell you, I can't do it without you. So, Boris, welcome to the old place. It'll be great to have you. And no one will punish you for having a party here. In fact, I'll show you where we keep the red wine and cake. There you go. Exciting times. My Take at 10 next. First, here are the news headlines and Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong. We start with some breaking news in the Middle East. The Israeli army is stepping up its ground operations in Gaza amid a wave of intensified attacks on the enclave. Our Home and Security editor Mark White sent this report from Tel Aviv.
Well, very strong and ominous comments from the Israeli Prime Minister's official spokesman, Mark Regev, who said that Hamas will suffer Israel's wrath tonight, that tonight Israel begins its payback. Those comments come as Hamas positions come under intense bombardment, strikes from tanks and artillery, as well as missiles and fast jets. The IDF have confirmed that tonight they will expand their ground war in Gaza significantly. They've issued another warning to civilians in northern Gaza to get out of the area and to head south. And meanwhile, the UK Foreign Office has issued an urgent warning to British nationals in Israel, warning of the possibility of increased rocket attacks in the hours and days ahead in response to this major escalation.
And tonight's escalation follows consecutive nights of Israeli incursions into Gaza and almost 3 weeks of aerial bombardment. Shelling and explosions have been seen on the border with the territory where Israeli forces have been massing since the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. The terror group's confirmed its fighters are clashing with Israeli troops. The Israeli Air Force is carrying out extensive strikes on the network of tunnels and other infrastructure. Internet and mobile phone services have also been cut off in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the United Nations has overwhelmingly adopted a resolution calling for a humanitarian truce in Gaza. The resolution drafted by Arab states condemns all violence, terror and indiscriminate attacks against Palestinian and Israeli civilians, and also calls for the unconditional release of hostages. It's demanding aid access to the besieged Gaza Strip. 120 members of the GA voted in favour, 40 5 abstained, that includes the United Kingdom, and 14 voted against it, which includes Israel and the United States. The resolution's non-binding, but it could put diplomatic pressure on Israel to de-escalate the conflict. In the UK, Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer are under growing pressure to change their position on the war. This is GB News, live across the UK. That's it from me for the moment. Now it's back to Mark.
Nice to have Aaron with us this evening on a Friday night. He's back in an hour's time. Welcome to Mark Dolan tonight. The weekend starts here. Welcome one and all. Boris Johnson joins GB News. I'll get reaction from TV news legend Nicholas Owen, and I'll be reacting to this story with my pundits at 10:30. Yes, the papers are coming in as well with full reaction from tonight's panel. Former Labour advisor Paul Richards, broadcaster David Oldroyd-Bolt, and journalist Jasmine Birtles. Plus, they'll be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros of the day. A packed hour, and those papers are coming, but first, my take at 10. Oh dear, reporting the news isn't easy, is it? The poor old BBC struggled to come up with the right words to describe an organisation that annihilates 260 revellers at a music festival, burns people alive and beheads babies. You and me know them as terrorists, but they came up with militants, which conjures images of principled gunmen, heroic freedom fighters. In doing so, the BBC caused anger, upset and distress among the 300,000 Jewish people in this country who are British and who, last time I checked, also paid the licence fee. To make matters worse, our wonderful holier-than-thou state broadcaster, this global beacon of truth, decided it was Israel that bombed a Gaza hospital, tragically killing 300 people. The news that spread like wildfire globally, handing Hamas a propaganda coup and leading to an explosion in anti-Semitic hate and likely further Jewish casualties around the world. The only problem is that Israel did not blow up the hospital. That's awkward for the Beeb, isn't it? And you can put paid to the idea that the BBC is respected and trusted globally after a television sketch show in Israel this week had a lot of humour at the BBC's expense. Take a listen.
Good evening from London. Here are some news from the war in Gaza. Israel has bombed a hospital, killing hundreds of innocent people. More. Much better. With more details, our Middle East correspondent, Harry Whitegilt.
Good evening, Rachel, from the illegal colony of Tel Aviv. Israeli officials has denied bombing the hospital, but we have video footage showing what really happened indeed.
Absolutely shocking, Harry.
Devastating but brilliant satire. Props to those brilliant performers. Meanwhile, even though thousands have been marching on the streets over the last 2 weekends, poor old ITV News clearly struggled to find a Palestinian guest for one of their programmes to talk about the very real and concerning issue of Islamophobia in this country. I've got to say, this woman's testimony to the channel brought a tear to my eye as she talked about her miserable life, subjected to relentless hate for her religion. Terribly appalling, but not as appalling as giving this woman a platform. As it's revealed, her name is Latifa Abu Chakra, and she's a mouthpiece for a pro-Hamas propaganda show called Palestine Declassified. This is a woman who described the horrific October the 7th attack on Israel as a moment of triumph and a homecoming. This show airs on the Hamas-loving, terror-supporting Press TV, who are owned by the Iranian regime and who are not allowed to broadcast on British TV. Not allowed to broadcast on British TV, but one of its most vocal stars obviously allowed on ITV. Might be time for HR to have a word with their booking team. So you see, this news gathering is difficult, isn't it? It's so hard not to make clumsy mistakes or accidentally parrot narratives verbatim, perpetuate myths, prolong prejudice and get things wrong. So what are we to do if we can't trust what we're watching and what we're listening to? Pretty easy. Tune in to Mark Dolan tonight, the home of diverse opinion, the home of free speech, and wherever humanly possible, the home of the truth. And no guests grabbed off a propaganda terrorist-supporting TV channel on the internet. Unlike our rivals, Mark Dolan tonight delivers the balanced news that you can trust. Take my word for it. Your reaction to the rather shambolic efforts of mainstream media to cover the Israel story. Mark@gbnews.com is the address. I'll get to your emails very shortly. But reaction now from three good friends of mine. Former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards, broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd-Bolt, and journalist and author and presenter Jasmine Birtles. I should add, she's the founder of the excellent money consumer website, moneymagpie.co.uk, is it?
Either, .com.
.com, she's got it all covered. David, your reaction to the BBC deciding Israel bombed a hospital, only apologising days later, and ITV platforming a pro-Hamas propagandist?
I think this is the absolute exemplar of what happens when you believe that there is an oppressor and there are the oppressed, and you have to find voices for the oppressed, rather than looking at the situation and thinking there is a country, a democratic country, that has been attacked by a terrorist organisation, and there is that democratic country defending itself in the way it has the right to do, not only under international law, but morally. And I think it shows the BBC up for what it is, which is a really quite craven institution when it comes to these sorts of questions. The fact that the BBC got this wrong, doubled down on it, and took so very long to correct the record is shameful, as is the fact that it took, essentially, the diktat of Parliament for the BBC to decide that it would call Hamas a terrorist organisation, but in fact not calling them a terrorist organisation, using the churlish, mealy-mouthed phrase that this is a state-prescribed terrorist organisation, that sort of clumsy thing that says, well, look, we don't really believe that they are, but we've been told to say they are, so really sorry, Hamas. And as for ITV, well, ITN, we should say, that's just deeply embarrassing. And as you say, they need to have a word with whoever booked that guest.
Paul Richards, great to have you back on the show. Look, it's worth pointing out that both the BBC and ITV have distanced themselves from these mistakes. They've made an apology. The BBC will argue that they're responsible for hundreds of hours of reporting a week, thousands a month, hundreds of thousands of hours a year. ITV News as well. Everyone makes mistakes. What's the problem? What's the story? What's your view?
Well, I am a fan of the BBC, as you well know, but I think on these occasions they just got it horribly wrong. And the problem is not that they got it wrong and then had to apologise. It's the reverberations of that report all over the world, where it then goes around as being truth and fills this narrative that the Israelis are bombing hospitals, when it was plainly not the case. And it feeds into what we know as the blood libel, you know, this idea that Jews historically have murdered children. And it just feeds this hate. It feeds this anti-Semitism all over the world. So the BBC, you know, is a good institution, but it has to be super careful in these heightened times not to make the kind of really stupid mistake that it made on that night.
Jasmine Birtles, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, you know, notwithstanding my criticisms of the organisation, it probably is still the most trusted gatherer of news on the planet. I can't think of a more sort of reliably trusted platform than the BBC, but they make mistakes. Of course they do. They've said in regards to whether Hamas are terrorists or not, that it's critical they don't take sides, which has been their position for decades now.
Well, absolutely. And it is very difficult in this particular case not to take sides or not to be perceived to be taking sides. It really is something where you need, it's nuanced, and it's very difficult to be allowed to be nuanced here and to say, well, on the one hand here, but on the other hand there. I think the problem both with the BBC and ITV and media organisations generally is a fundamental, well, it's rather like David said, it's a fundamental wokeness of so very many of the people who work there, so that their original thought immediately is that there are people who are oppressed and that we must go on and go on about that level of oppression. And there are all sorts of different levels of oppression. So if that is what you're starting from, then it's going to be very difficult for you to be genuinely balanced, I think.
I love my pundits tonight. We'll be hearing from them at 10:30 sharp when the papers come in. But next up, Boris Johnson joins GB News. I'll be getting reaction from tonight's newsmaker, legendary news broadcaster Nicholas Owen. That's next. Boris is coming to GB. We'll talk about that in 2 minutes.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's
my new teeth. It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
More of your emails shortly, but it's time now for the results of another Mark Dolan Tonight People's Poll. Following mistakes in their reporting on Israel, do you still trust mainstream news? The results are in, and unfortunately, 79% say no, you do not trust the mainstream media. 21% say yes, they do. OK, well, it's time now for the Newsmaker, in which a fearless commentator speaks out on the big issues of the day. And let's get more on the bombshell news that Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister of this country, is to join GB News as a presenter. Let's get reaction from a legend of television news himself, Nicholas Owen. Nicholas, welcome to Mark Dolan Tonight. What was your reaction when you saw this on your phone or on the news wires when the story popped up?
Yeah, I think I was glaring down at a computer screen at the time. I think my reaction was a bit like, I felt like Boris himself. Golly! I was amazed, I have to say. Very, very surprised for quite a large number of reasons, which I'm sure you and I can discuss, Mr. Dolan.
Well, indeed so. First of all, I mean, is it good news? Is it bad news? Is it a positive for the channel? Are there any downsides?
Oh, well, let's go to the positive side of it. Of course. I mean, this man is a major headline maker. I mean, in his time, he's written a lot of pieces which have had the headlines put along the top of them. But certainly when he was finally became Prime Minister, my goodness, we had a character in Downing Street, did we not? A great personality. And an awful lot of people thought, oh, this man is really something. A huge galloping majority got all those seats that had been Labour for so many years. He he'd turn them round, and he would go running in those terrible shorts as well. Yes, I know. So anyway, it all looked fair, didn't it? And then things, of course, as they always do for every single prime minister, including even sort of great heroes of our time like Tony Blair and whoever else you want to mention, Margaret Thatcher, things go wrong eventually, and it didn't look quite so good. And he struggled. COVID came along, and then there's been all the backwash after the business of what's now called Partygate. Now, I don't know how many of your viewers actually watch the programme Partygate. It's gone into the language, hasn't it? But it was a Channel 4 programme, I think. My wife and I sat and watched, I think there were 2 episodes. And I frankly, I was appalled by what I saw there. And I'm afraid, Boris, you played your part in that. Mr. Sunak, our Prime Minister, you played your part at all. They haven't denied any of this. So I think one's views of Boris have gone right up by a lot of people, come down by a lot of people. But you have a major newsmaker now. You're not short of them, I know. And some of them make the news for all the wrong reasons for your channel. Dropped you right in it. But it'll be very interesting to see how Boris progresses.
Well, I share your measured and balanced attitude to Boris Johnson. Like you say, he makes headlines. He is a very, very provocative figure. And I gave my warts and all account of him at the top of the hour, in which I pointed out his failures and his triumphs. But, Nicholas, what does it tell us about the changing media landscape that he should choose a relatively small channel like GB News as his home?
Well, I suppose I would be very interested to know, Mark. I mean, I'm a very lucky man nowadays. I don't work anymore for the BBC or for ITN, although I have the greatest respect for both of them, of course. Greatest respect. Very difficult for them. But I can more or less say what I want about all these things. I think that the difficulty with Boris is always that of sort of reliability, you know. I mean, I think he's going to do great things in terms of publicity for you. I'm sure he will. But will he actually turn up at the studio on time? Things like that. You know, I mean, he's a pretty shambolic person, I have to tell you, and he'd probably be the first to admit it. So I think for your channel, it's a coup. There's no doubt about that. A lot of people will want to tune in to see what he has to say and hear what he has to say. But I sort of think, Mark, that, you know, it's great for people like you and I. We get to sit in front of the camera, don't we? There's all those poor nervous types sitting back in the newsroom saying, blimey, where is he? Where is he? And I'm going to quote to you now. Charles Moore was his editor at the Daily Telegraph for many years, and Boris used to write this column for which he was paid a vast amount of money, £250,000. Don't know what you're paying him, but never mind. What Charles Moore? Oh, only that, really? What, even less than you? Oh, God, poor man.
No one's paid less than me. Go on.
What Charles Moore said about Boris was, the one thing about Boris, the one thing you can rely on with Boris is you can't rely on him.
Yeah.
So in many ways, all right, you're getting a crackerjack there. You're getting somebody who is bound to provoke an awful lot of controversy, a sort of unmissable person, if you like, on air. And for your channel, for any channel, that's obviously going to be enormously interesting. I shall be amongst the many viewers absolutely fascinated to see how dear Boris, who I've known for an awful long time. I can go right back to the days when he would cycle very precariously through red lights in London with everybody shouting Boris, Boris when he was the mayor. It's a coup. There's no doubt you've landed a very, very, very big fish. But Mark, slippery fish too. So interesting.
Listen, I think you should be the next recipient of a GB News contract. I've been saying it for a while. I must text the boss about that, Nicholas, and I mean that. I'm deadly serious.
Well, every time the postman comes, I look on the mat to see if it's there, Dolan. So, you know, come on.
I think Boris should be your first guest on Nicholas Owen tonight. Speaking about the wider industry, can we talk about Ofcom? Now, Ofcom is the government body who regulate broadcasting, and rightly so. They do a good job, an important job. There's talk of Ofcom regulating the internet. Is that a good idea?
It would be a great idea if it was possible. I read that, and I've looked into that quite a bit and read what Ofcom is supposed to do. I find myself in an interesting position here, Mark, in that a lot of colleagues I've known down the broadcasting years have ended up with Ofcom in one shape or form, and they're all very, very good and very, very bright people. I mean, get into an argument and a discussion with some of my old chums who now work for Ofcom, and they've got a lot of answers, which people like me find, they're quite good at sort of fending off criticism and so on. But my criticism is quite simple. The internet is going in so many different directions. I mean, when we talk about the internet, do we just mean literally what is now looks very old-fashioned, or do we mean TikTok? Do we mean Facebook? Do we mean X, or whatever it's called now? Do we mean any number of other channels that are bursting on the scene all the time? I keep reading, almost every day I open my paper and I see that there's some new form of communication. In intelligence, artificial intelligence is creeping over. Are they going to be trying to monitor that as well? It would be a great idea. It would be lovely if we could somehow bring to bear the sort of pressures that GB News has been under a lot, I know. But fair dues, you're out there in the marketplace.
Correct.
You're putting yourself out there. You're going to be shot at. You're going to be, and Ofcom are coming down, whether you think it's fair or not. But when it comes to the internet, it's like going out onto a grouse moor with a pea shooter, and the birds are going in all different directions.
Too right, a couple of dead ducks along the way. Nicholas, it's always a privilege to have you on the show. Keep an eye on the contents of that letterbox, because some correspondence might be with you soon. I certainly hope so. My thanks to television news legend Nicholas Owen. Well, folks, we've got lots more to come, including tomorrow's papers with full pundit reaction and some cracking headlines, including the blonde bombshell himself. See you in 2.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Lovely to have your company. Look, so many emails coming in. Apologies, I've not had as much time for your emails as usual. So much to talk about, so many big stories, but I'll get to your emails presently. But first, it's time for this. Thank you, Jonathan, bringing us the papers, and we start with The Times. Iran hijacking UK protests. Iranian agents are creating unrest in Britain by stoking Gaza protests, senior police have said, as they prepare for a fresh round of demonstrations tomorrow. Mandelson, married at 70. Peter Mandelson and Ronaldo Avila da Silva said, "I do" today. The Labour peer explains why they waited so long. Congratulations on his nuptials. And let me tell you, he does not look 70. Bye weekends. Always a good read. Gaza blackout as Israel launches onslaught. Israeli military warns ground operations in Gaza Strip expanding. Internet and mobiles cut off as Israel Defense Forces unleash the heaviest aerial bombardments so far. UN warns basic services have collapsed and disease is spreading. Troops mass on border as the IDF say we are prepared on all fronts. Of course, that's the Israeli military. Mortgage rates could fall below 4% next year. Here's hoping. And in the Middle East, Starmer faces crisis as party rebels call for ceasefire, which was the topic of my big opinion, which I'm delighted to say that Joe in our digital team has crafted into an excellent video. He's also putting the Boris monologue out and also my take at 10. Daily Telegraph next. Israel's ground forces advance on Gaza. And Kemi Badenoch, the Business and Trade Secretary, it's good to be black in Britain. Also, Mayor Khan's call for ceasefire piles pressure on Starmer over divisions in Labour. Oh, we called it all at 9, didn't we, folks? And £7 million taxpayer bill for Speaker's House refurbishment. That's right, the Speaker's House in the Commons, it's costing £7 million, your money and mine, to fix. Daily Mirror now. Imminent invasion fear, carnage looms. Israel ramps up attacks on Gaza. The Guardian. No fuel, no power, nowhere safe. Life on the streets of Gaza. And how about this? The Guardian writing about us. There's a surprise. Boris Johnson to join GB News as a TV presenter. Also, Taylor Swift now a billionaire after record-breaking tour. Daily Star, oddball terrorised village in cut-price clobber from the store. The Asda Gimp. A man held for being a suspected gimp told cops, "I'm not a gimp. I'm not wearing a gimp suit." Joshua Hunt, who made his bargain suit from gear he bought at Asda, was fined for scaring drivers. Well, I think his normal face is already quite terrifying. And those are your front pages. Well, folks, let's get full pundit reaction now. Loving the Dream Team tonight. The A-Team. Folks, we're going to give the show a lick of paint in the next few weeks. Greg, myself, James and Ben and the boss. We're going to have new titles, a little bit of different stuff behind me and around me. What do you think I should call the pundits? Should I call them the panel? Should I call them the pundits? Or what about the A-Team? Let me know what you think I should call my trio of geniuses. Mark at gbnews.com. Tonight, my trio of genii are Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards, former, I should say, although never say never, broadcaster and historian David Oldroyd-Bolton, journalist, author and presenter Jasmine Birtles. Listen, let's have a look at some of these stories. First of all, can we just start? It's a Friday. Can we have some good news? Peter Mandelson gets married at the age of 70, Paul. Do you know Mr Mandelson?
I do, and I'm absolutely delighted by this news. I mean, they're a long-term couple, and I've known Peter for 30 years, but your point earlier, doesn't he look amazing?
Yeah, he really does.
I mean, obviously it's his wedding day, he's a happy chap, but he is just so sprightly and young and with it, and his clothes are fabulous, and he looks great, and good to him. You know, good for him. Absolutely wonderful.
And he still has political currency, doesn't he?
Huge amount, yes. I mean, he's got an enormous... Oh, he's been around since, what, the 70s, and certainly through the 80s and 90s, and Keir Starmer listens to him, as do we all.
Indeed. Well, that's it. I mean, have you felt the hand of Tony Blair and Peter Mandelson on Starmer's leadership in, let's say, the last 12 months? Because I think he's struck quite a different note. I would suggest he's shifted into the centre ground more.
I think he's learned from the experience of previous Labour governments, which is always a wise thing to do. And of course, there are lots of voices that are influencing him. But, you know, he's his own man, and he knows that the next election is not the same as 1997. Spice Girls are not in the charts. We don't have pages. You know, it is a different era. But he is listening to those that won, and why wouldn't you?
Indeed. Listen, let's have a look now at some of these other stories. And Jasmine, Gaza blackout as Israel launches onslaught, and a debate in the country, a debate around the world, and a debate in the papers about whether this is a good or a bad thing. You know, the Daily Telegraph is quite bullish on this particular manoeuvre. But then you've got the left-leaning Guardian, no fuel, no power, nowhere safe, life on the streets of Gaza, striking a judgmental note on what Israel are doing.
Well, absolutely, and you do see that, as you say, the left-leaning papers are judgmental of this, and the wording, as you say, that's being used, the onslaught, for example, I mean, the I paper, that's left-leaning as well. So they're trying not to, because they know that there's been such carnage in Israel. They're trying to not look like it, but they basically don't like Israel, and that does come across, frankly.
Indeed, and you've got that partisan language. You're right to point it out. I mean, Private Eye last week had a front page which offended many Jewish people. The front page went on Twitter and was viewed 3 million times, not because I think it was that popular.
Right.
Sometimes things go viral for the wrong reasons, which I speak from personal experience. But I think it's because many people, Jewish people, felt gaslit by the media commentary of what's happening. And it's very much up in the air now about whether Israel have a perceived right to defend themselves.
Well, that's it. And to be honest, I think, you know, what does actually constitute defence? And that's a difficulty for everybody, I think, because does defence involve attacking? Because sometimes it does. And that's the problem that we see here. I think everybody would assume, yes, it is right for Israel to defend itself. And then you say, well, how should you do that? Should that include attacking those that they think will attack them?
Dave, too right. David, you're a top historian. I've described Hamas and their attitudes, their actions as rebadged Nazism. What does history tell us about what Israel are currently doing as we speak?
I think there's a very good comparison to be drawn with Serbia in 1914 and the reaction of Austria-Hungary. Serbia, by killing the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, committed an act of terrorism in order to elicit from Austria-Hungary an enormous response that Serbia knew would get its sympathy. I mean, Serbia was essentially run by a gang of terrorists at this time. The people who assassinated King Alexander in 1903 were running the country for the next 11 years. Hamas is a terrorist organisation that has committed an act of atrocity in order, I think, to elicit from Israel a strong response. I would like to ask those people who say that Israel should not be responding in the way it is, do they hold the same view about Ukraine? Would they say that the Ukrainians should not, in defending themselves from Russian incursion, use force that could end in the destruction of Russian lives and property? And if they do not draw that equivalence, why not? Why is Israel uniquely in the world held to an impossibly high standard, a moral standard and standard of restraining civilian casualties? And I would say that that is simply because these people do not believe that Israel has a right to exist, and probably because they don't really believe that Jews should be anywhere near the Middle East in the first place. And so there is rampant hypocrisy. And I think the wording of the Guardian article, they have no control over the Israeli war waged against them, while the Israelis have no control over the Hamas attack that has been waged on them, as they have no control over the constant bombardment with missiles that most Israelis live with. And I think those responsible for that Guardian headline need to step back and have a look at their preoccupation with Israel compared with other nations in the world and think why that is and whether they are, in this instance, right to phrase it in such a way.
I mean, Israel are between a rock and a hard place, aren't they, Paul? They face an existential threat from Hamas, who seek the destruction of all Jews in the region, the elimination of Israel. On the other hand, if they defend themselves, which they currently are, then civilians will die.
Well, this is the issue, isn't it? But I was thinking, if a terrorist organisation ran Wales, and Wales was...
I think it does,
was dedicated to the destruction...
That Drakeford, he's got a slightly... he's got an authoritarian streak.
Serious face.
I'm back in the room.
And they were firing rockets into the Midlands.
Yeah.
And then they massacred people at a peace festival. You know, we would go in, would we not? We would send some battalions of the Coldstream Guards in to sort it out. And the world would not say you don't have the right to do that. Think about the civilians.
Yeah.
They would say you have a right to defend yourself. So why, as has been said, do we hold Israel to a different standard to any other sovereign nation? You know, they have the right to defend themselves, and they have to do what they have to do to protect themselves from a force who want to destroy them utterly.
What about those, briefly, so I'll come back to you, Jasmine, but what about those that describe Gaza as an open prison, that talk about war crimes on the part of Israel and of effective apartheid?
Well, all of those are false. And if you look at the picture on the front page of The Guardian today, where there are pictures of faces behind bars, the semiotics of this, the visualisation of this, is that supposedly a population imprisoned. And that is just feeding into this same narrative. We know, you know, pictures are important, aren't they? And there's a deliberate choice on The Guardian's front page to stick that on the front page. It's inflammatory, unnecessary. As we say, Israel is being held to an entirely different standard to any other nation on earth, including, for example, Ukraine. Good point that you make.
Is Gaza an open prison, and are Israel responsible for an apartheid state?
Gaza is not an open prison. It is a state held captive by a terrorist organisation funded by a terrorist state in Iran. And Israel is certainly not an apartheid state. More than 50% of Israelis are people of colour. There is a huge Arabic population. It is the only functioning democracy in the Middle East. And to call it an apartheid state is, on the one hand, I think, to downplay the true horror of apartheid in South Africa, and on the other, simply to throw the strongest rhetorical language possible at Israel because people don't like it. There is no validity to it, and anyone using that term should automatically be told to shut up.
But mystifyingly, Jasmine, Hamas are winning the PR war. In a strange and perverse way, they seem to have gained the moral high ground, aided and abetted by some quarters of the press.
Well, very much so, yes. I definitely think that. And there is, again, it's a sort of, it's, you know, a woke stance that you have these certain peoples who are oppressed, and they've managed to get into this particular area. And one thing that I do feel about this attack is that it's come at a particularly bad time, I think, for left-wing Israelis, because, you know, Netanyahu has had a lot of hatred and pushback from Israelis themselves, particularly those on the left, who have been pointing out much of his terrible behaviour. And now this attack has actually supported his position. He's stronger than ever, and he should actually be taken to court right now for some of his crimes, I consider.
Well, indeed, and actually, certainly from my own experience of friends and colleagues growing up, and current Jewish friends, that I would argue it's pretty much in the British Jewish tradition to be on the left. Not everyone, but just a good number. It feels like that's the thrust of it. But I know so many Jewish people who have become very disillusioned with what you describe as the woke left in their response to what has been a truly appalling terror attack on innocent people. Can we talk about the outrageous cost of the Speaker's House refurbishment, Jasmine? 7 million quid. Now, I do like Sir Lindsay Hoyle. I think he's been a good speaker, less divisive than his predecessor. But we're not made of money, are we? I mean, what do you think about that? Could you spend 7 million quid on your house?
No, well, you could. Fine, give me 7 million. I'm very happy to. But no, I mean, really, I'd like to see where he's getting his gold plated.
It's not his house, is it?
No, this is the point.
It's like, I mean, you've been in it, I'm sure.
Yes.
It's a museum. It belongs to the nation, and 7 million quid's not that bad.
A historic building.
Well, and moreover, it's Grade 1 listed, which means that it is the requirement for every tiny detail to be done to the standard of historic buildings is exceptional. It's a suite of staterooms, of offices. It is. Would we rather that we spent the money on this and kept it from falling into the Thames, or would we rather in 50 or 100 years' time look back and think, I wish we'd spent that relatively paltry amount on keeping this extraordinary historic building
Well,
up
I
to
don't
scratch?
mind them sort of, you know, fixing cracks in the ceiling and possibly dealing with the mice. But the Telegraph understand, Paul, that some of the money has been spent on silverware, cutlery, for goodness sake.
But it's not his, is it? It's the nation's.
Yes, quite.
All the visiting people that go through that building, you know, every single day, from heads of state to tourists and everyone else, will enjoy the surrounds. Why not?
But it's going to be tough for all those people who are struggling to pay their mortgage. You know, we are, as you know, in a cost of living crisis. The mortgage rates are going up. A lot of people are looking at repossessions now. I think, you know, the next. So it's a tricky one. It's like when the royals spend, you know, millions on this, that and the other, and you say, well, it's not theirs, but, yeah.
But also the point is, David, that if we were doing this in our own homes, we would speak to several contractors, we get the cheapest price, wouldn't we? Possibly a recommendation from like a neighbour.
And how are we to know that that has not occurred
WhatsApp?
In this instance?
Yeah, I mean, can I just tell
I'm
you
not sure, by the way, I take this argument that people are suffering in a cost of living crisis, therefore the nation needs to be parsimonious with national heritage. They're two entirely different things.
Well, I don't mind them putting a bit of lacquer on the front door, but more than £7,500 was spent on new mattresses and bedding for Sir Lindsay's residents.
Well,
£7.5 grand. I mean, I hope he sleeps well, because...
let's get you an invite and you can have a look around.
Yeah.
Yes.
Next time you're at dinner, you can tell us, Mark.
Can I just say, I mean, look, my parsimonious panel, I recently purchased a mattress topper from Argos, and it works a treat.
Good for you.
About 50 quid. You put it on top of a crappy old mattress and it's like a new bed. Let me tell you that there are other shops available selling excellent products like that. Next at Home, Sainsbury's do them. Who else, Greg? Who do you like? John Lewis. There are so many good shops. Not only Argos. I went to Argos, but there are lots of options. Highly recommended. Mattress topper, memory foam. Oof, I tell you.
You live in luxury.
Great night of sleep. OK, folks, listen, we've got lots more to get through. After this, my pundits, the A-team, the Dream Team, will be nominating their headline heroes and back page zeros of the day, plus more reaction to the news that Boris Johnson has joined GB News and tomorrow's Express with a cracking headline. See you in 2.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
One of the great privileges of presenting this show is if I ask you for help, ask you a question, I get a flood of answers. So I asked you what you think we should call my brilliant pundits. Should we call them the A-Team, the Dream Team, the Pundits? Well, Richard says, Mark's mates. Nice one. Well, they are my mates, let me tell you. Richard, another Richard, call them Muppets, especially the Labour supporters. That's very unfair. Mark Dolan tonight, it's the home of diverse opinion, don't you know? How about Karen? Call them the GBs. Nicely done. We have three amigos from Carol. Glenn, the panel beaters.
That's good.
Work, I tell you what, this show isn't just thrown together. How about the marksmen, says Sarah.
Yes.
Class, the three musketeers. Take that. The three GBs. That's quite clever, isn't it? Julie, I've been trying to think of a name for your panel, Mark. I'm thinking the three sages, but I keep mulling it over. That's not bad. They are sages as well. They're very wise. Listen, very excited viewers in regards to Boris Johnson. Lots of people are buzzing about him joining the channel. Mark, whilst I can understand why GB News wants Bojo, he's clever, witty, very popular. My reaction is, oh no, please no more of him. Deport him if necessary. The question is, will we get Boris's true opinion? Or will it be just what Carrie tells him to say? Okay, they're not pulling her punches. Love your show, Mark, says Camilla. Is that Queen Camilla? Your Majesty, thank you so much. She said you could call your panel the Topical Trio. Oh. There we are. Look, I could read these panel names. Panel of Perfection, the Wholesome Threesome, and Lorna. The Couch Hot Potatoes. That might be the best so far. Listen, there you go. Lots of emails to come tomorrow. In tonight's show, we're back at 9, but reacting to the big stories of the day. Paul Richards, David Oldroyd Bolton, Jasmine Birtles, and the Express is in. Let's have a look at what they've got for us. Unprecedented bombardment, Israeli ground forces, expanding activity as full-scale invasion looms. And Billy Connolly, this is the headline I was talking about earlier, reports of my own demise have been greatly exaggerated. A true comedy icon. OK, time now for my pundits' headline heroes and back page zeros. Start with the zeros. Paul.
My zero is Mark Rowley from the Metropolitan Police, the Commissioner of Police, for not doing enough to police the demonstrations that are now ruining everyone's Saturdays in London. There are clearly chants of jihad and the slogans around eradicating Israel, and the law is there to protect people. Why aren't they making arrests?
Mark Rowley has argued that the law is ambiguous and he needs clarification for his officers, but it's all about opinions. How about your back page zero, David?
Mine is the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, who's reported in the Times today to have texted during July 2020 that Boris Johnson was of a Trump-Bolsonaro level of madness for wanting to stop us being in lockdown at a time when we knew that there was absolutely no clinical validity for lockdown. So I think that speaks for itself.
A brilliant nomination. How about, I can see you nodding your head there, Jasmine, and I'm nodding along as well. How about your back page zero?
Well, I've gone for the entire celebration of Halloween. I cannot stand Halloween. I think it's ridiculous. You know, in America, they're set to spend $12 billion this year on
Ridiculous.
Halloween. Why would you have a celebration of all that is miserable, demonic, terrible, dark, death, disease, the whole lot? It makes no sense to me, never has done.
And also all that plastic rubbish that's going to go into landfill.
Yes, absolutely. All those horrible sweets, the whole lot is wrong.
Thanks, but no thanks. OK, how about your headline hero, Paul?
Well, indulge me on this one, but I went to the funeral yesterday of my father-in-law, John Barnes, and he's not famous and he's not in the papers, but he's one of those quintessential Englishmen, decent village dweller. You know, he was a stalwart of the parish council. He kept his allotment. He had the same job for 50 years and the best of British. So we said goodbye to him yesterday. He's my hero of the week.
R.I.P. dear John. What did he grow in his allotment? Do you know?
Sunflowers. He was big on sunflowers, and he
wonderful.
Yep, and beans, I remember.
Well, bless him.
What a nice man, you know. So sometimes you just have to look. There is decency out there, despite all this. And he was one of the decent ones.
Most definitely. I've got no doubt he'll be greatly missed. And David, your headline hero?
Well, mine is the late Ken Hedges, who was the last surviving member of the 1968-69 Trans-Arctic exploration, which he was an SAS medic who, along with 4 teammates, crossed the polar ice cap, the North Pole, spent 235 days at the North Pole in pitch black darkness and temperatures of sub 50 degrees Celsius, all without GPS, drawn only by huskies. He was a remnant of an age when we were truly extraordinary explorers, people who were not cowed by health and and safety and went out to find the most extraordinary we could of this natural Earth, and also in doing so contributed a great deal to our understanding of that climate and how it's changing, not only now, but how it has changed over millennia.
Plus, like you, he was a handsome buccaneering hero, and he didn't have Gore-Tex.
No. And to the end of his life, he would go out in temperatures down to -12 wearing just canvas trousers and a T-shirt because he said his thermostat had been changed by the experience.
So that's him. That's not the only thing. A couple of seconds for your for your headline hero, please, Jasmine.
It would still be Andrew Bridgen, who last Friday spoke to a pathetically empty House about things that are very serious. And this I think, shows why the whole of Parliament needs to be rejigged.
He wants to know why excess deaths have been at almost pandemic levels this year. Thank you for your company. Love the emails. Love my pundit. See you tomorrow at 9. Headliners is next.
Hi there, it's Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Further rain or showers for many of us this weekend, with some gusty winds around as well. But there will be some drier and brighter interludes, particularly across central and southern parts. Now, overnight, we're going to see a continuation of the showers. In fact, an intensification of the showers across some southern and southwestern parts. Some longer spells of rain pushing into the south and southeast of England for a time with gusty winds. Further showery rain pushing into eastern Scotland as well as Northern Ireland. And in many of these places, with the ground very wet, there could be issues by dawn. Now, we're going to see a mild night because of the gusty wind, but in some of these central parts, northern England, into the Midlands, East Anglia, a few mist patches and some colder spots as we start off the weekend. Any mist and fog will lift, and then some brighter skies for a time, moving north across the country to affect parts of Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia, parts of northern England into the afternoon. But there'll be further persistent rain for eastern Scotland, could cause some problems at times this weekend, and an upturn in the wet and windy weather then towards the southwest later on. That pushes north on Saturday night into northern England, Northern Ireland and much of eastern Scotland once again. Further south, a return to sunny spells, but also some blustery showers, the showers heaviest and most frequent around southern and western coasts. We keep the showers going in the south on Monday, drier but colder in the north.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show